Hi, I'm Justin Barrett, president of Blueprint 1543. I'm a former university professor and psychological scientist, and this episode, I want to talk about the Star of Bethlehem. A few episodes back, I talked about auras and whether people really do see auras to make an important point about having a degree of sort of caution towards certain kinds of claims that sound fanciful and a little bit hard to believe, but not to be cynical about them, to be open-minded, but to explore the evidence and try to hold that tension. And I think the Star of Bethlehem is another one of these cases where we need to really carefully examine it instead of either dismissing it out of hand or thinking we understand the story perfectly well to begin with. It was, I don't know, 15 years ago or so that I remember picking up a magazine of some sort in the United Kingdom and seeing in it that there was an article by the prominent leader of a major world Christian denomination writing about the Star of Bethlehem, among other things. And so I picked it up and flipped through it and discovered that in print, it was rejecting the idea that the Star of Bethlehem announcing the birth of Jesus ever happened, that it was a mythological, fanciful addition to the Christmas story to try to maybe satisfy certain kinds of Old Testament prophecies or something like that. But that there was no astronomical phenomena that could match the description in the biblical text. And so as a science-informed but Christian man, he was saying, okay, that is not a part of the Bible that he was going to affirm. And I thought, well, hold it. Let's not be so hasty, because there are actually some really interesting accounts out there that are very much science informed about how to make sense of especially the book of Matthew's description of the Star of Bethlehem. But to get started, let me read Matthew's description, because the text matters. It has some interesting details that we often miss. So I'm in chapter 2 of the book of Matthew. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east, remember that, in the east, and have come to worship him. And when Herod the king heard it, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, and gathered together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, and began to inquire of them where the Christ was to be born. And they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for it has been written by the prophet, and they're referencing the prophet Micah here, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod secretly called the Magi and ascertained from them the time the star appeared. Notice that, the star appears. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and make careful search for the child, and when you have found him, report to me, that I too may come and worship him. And having heard the king, they, the Magi, went their way, and lo, the star which they had seen in the east went on before them until it came and stood over where this child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And they came into the house and saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. And opening their treasures, they presented him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And that's how the account goes. So I try to draw your attention to a few features. First of all, the star appears in the east. The Magi see the star and they head to Jerusalem. Now the Magi are part of the historical record. They were sort of a priestly, astrological kind of clan of people. They looked to the stars for signs. They were thought to be among the Medes, spending time in the regions of Persia and Babylon. So you might think of modern day Iraq and Iran. And so they're coming from the east. They see the star in the east, and then they go away from the star, west, to Jerusalem, to the court of Herod. And then Herod sends them to Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem to Bethlehem, where the star is now in the southern sky before them. Okay? And as I read the text, you may have noticed, they see it as the same star. So we've got this strange astronomical occurrence. A star appears. It wasn't just there before. It appears in the east. The stargazing Magi see this as a sign, and they head not toward the star, but away from the star west to Jerusalem, and then head south. And once they start their trip south, lo and behold, the star is ahead of them, appearing to hang over Bethlehem. You might think, based on the reading of the text, wow, this is really strange. And so it's not too surprising that somebody might be a little bit skeptical about whether this is a real account, because there are a few things about stars that just don't add up. First of all, stars don't just appear, and they certainly don't move from the east to the south in terms of the night sky. So that's pretty puzzling. And this has led people through hundreds and hundreds of years, at least back to the 300s, to figure out, well, what was this thing? And there are lots of different hypotheses have been proposed. One of those is it's just fictitious. It was made up. It never happened, because if something this strange had happened, everybody would have written about it. So there's that kind of completely cynical kind of view. A second view is it did happen, and it was just God doing something really special, unusual. It doesn't fit the pattern of anything else. And, well, it was written about in the book of Matthew. So what do you mean nobody wrote about it? So there's that kind of answer. And then there are kind of positions in between, which is the, okay, yes, let's take the Matthew text as evidence. It's an early first century writing, probably based on even earlier first century oral traditions and writings. So let's take it seriously as far as it goes. But can we find any kind of corroborating information to make sense of what Matthew is trying to tell us about this occasion? Because it's so strange, surely something like this should be in the record somewhere else. Well, what are possibilities then? One common possibility that's been suggested is a supernova. That doesn't really fit the profile of a star. Yes, it could sort of shine brightly, or a nova or supernova, shine brightly and then fade over time, and then that would account for it being there and then disappearing. And certainly it would be received as a sign of, wow, something spectacular is going on by these astrologers of the day. The Magi would have certainly taken notice of that. But that wouldn't account for how it could be in the east and then the south, because it would be in the same place in the night sky. So that one's a little peculiar. It also doesn't hang over a particular location like the text suggests the Star of Bethlehem did. So supernova, possibility, but it doesn't perfectly fit. That doesn't mean it isn't right. It's a possibility. Another possibility that's been floated is a double or triple conjunction of planets appearing very bright in the sky. It is known, it's part of the astronomical record, that in 7 BC, Jupiter and Saturn came very close to each other in the night sky, would have appeared very bright, and certainly that event would have gotten the attention of astronomers of the day. They would have noticed, and sure enough, it is a recorded event. It happened. And it happened in the constellation of Pisces. There's some historical evidence to suggest that this indeed would have gotten the attention of people like the Magi. They would have gone, whoa, something interesting is happening on Earth. It's commonly thought that Saturn represents kings or deity or something really powerful, and that Jupiter could represent the son of the king. And so the king is having a son, but it's written in the stars, so it's really an important kind of episode. And it's in the constellation of Pisces, which some writers have suggested for these ancient Medes, these Magi then, they regarded sort of the earth as mapped into the skies, and so Pisces represented to them the Hebrew people, that Palestinian area. And so that's how they knew that it's going to be a Hebrew or Jewish king that is being born. That is in 7. That double conjunction, though, still doesn't fit that profile of moving through the night sky, appearing in the east and moving to the south. Only that it's a strange astronomical event that appeared in the sky. Well, it happened 3 times during 7 BC, because the planets sort of, at least from our perspective, look like they're getting closer to each other as they move around in their orbits relative to us. So that definitely got their attention. But in 6 BC, then we get a triple conjunction. Mars joins the party. And so we've got Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter together. Mars, even in Greco-Roman imagery, Mars is the god of war. For the Medes and Persians, they had something similar going on there, that Mars is going to represent a warrior too. So maybe they're thinking a warrior king, still in Pisces. So a warrior king of the Hebrew people is upon us, 6 BC. Again, still doesn't fit the profile of hanging over a location, moving from the east to the south. But definitely this got the attention of the Magi. They wrote about it. We have historical records and others. This is also a recorded event. But for them, maybe what those two, the double and then the triple conjunction, what they did is they set the stage for them to be ready for something. We know something big is happening. We know that it's happening among these Hebrew people, who we call the Jews. And so we're ready. But when's the sign that this new king, this warrior, mighty warrior king, maybe with some hints of divinity, is going to be born? Well, now we're waiting for something else. And this something else did happen in 5 BC. That something else is recorded in Chinese records as a comet with a tail. Now, the comet theory of the Star of Bethlehem goes back to at least the 3rd, 4th century. It's an old idea. But it's often been disregarded as what was, as what the Star of Bethlehem was, because, well, first of all, it's a comet, not a star. And some people have felt uncomfortable with that kind of linguistic difference. But that New Testament Greek doesn't have this separate distinction for star. The people of the time wouldn't have had a distinction between stars and comets clear enough that that would have mattered to the original readers of the text. And so I think we can push that concern aside. The star, close enough. The description of the star is close enough to a comet because it hangs over a place. And 1st century writings, including by Josephus, suggest that that is a way that comets were described. Other comets were described as hanging over a location in a way that stars were not commonly described. Partly because of how they appear on the horizon when they are getting close to the Earth and the Sun, that nearest point to our Sun. And they have this certain appearance on that makes them look like they're hanging over location, and Josephus and others use that language to describe comets. So at the time, we've got independent historical reason for thinking that comets have that right kind of appearance. The other kind of interesting thing about comets is they do move in the night sky, 1 to 2 degrees. So it is very possible for a comet to appear in the east, and then over time for it to be appearing from the east and gradually moving so that it's appearing in the south. It would take maybe a couple of months for it to make that much of a change, and it needed to be visible that long, but that is not unheard of, and indeed, we have Chinese records that suggest there was such a comet in 5 BC that appeared in the east, and then over the next 2 months, it very well could have seemed to be in the southern sky at that point, hanging over Bethlehem. And so, according to material scientist Colin Humphreys, who I'm borrowing heavily from his account of the Star of Bethlehem, you can read about it in the 1995 issue of the Journal of Science and Christian Belief. You can find his more complete account of the Star of Bethlehem as a comet. A comet then that would have indicated, whoa, now's the time that that warrior king is being born in Israel. A criticism of this hypothesis that's been raised is that commonly in the ancient world, comets were regarded as a negative omen, not a positive omen. But Colin Humphreys addresses that. He notes that, yes, that is widely true, but in this specific time and place, that was not exclusively true, and in fact there he references some textual evidence of comets being regarded as positive signs, and even specifically as the birth of kings. So it is very possible that 1st century Magi hanging out in Babylon, perhaps, they've already seen a double conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn and thought something important is coming. It's in Pisces, so we know roughly where it's going to be. It's going to be where those Jewish people are from, over there around Jerusalem. The next year they see the triple conjunction, they get a little bit of extra information. Whoa, this is a really big deal. Warrior king, very powerful, very important, but when's this guy going to be born? And then the comet appears in the east and they go, okay, this is it. The comet with the big long tail, and the Chinese record specifies that it's a comet with a tail that sweeps away the old and brings in the new. With that big tail has appeared in the east. So they jump on their camels and they start riding. And how long does it take them? Well, by the time they've sort of saddled up their camels, they've taken this ride across the desert from Babylon is probably the nearest they would have been. It's possible they were even further away than that. Takes them a month or two to get to Herod's palace and then regroup and start heading south. By then, the comet is in the southern sky, pointing, as it seems, toward Bethlehem, where lo and behold, they find Jesus. So there's one of the most compelling, I think, science-informed but textually sensitive accounts of the Star of Bethlehem that I've come across. And I just find it wonderful how Sir Colin Humphreys, a material scientist, has used his Christian faith and his careful reading of Scripture together with his scientific acumen, drawing upon historical and scientific documents to create a broader, bigger picture and showing that maybe we should take the textual descriptions a little more seriously and not just write them off as fanciful if they don't immediately fit our expectations, our wise science-filled expectations from this day and age. But sometimes there's something more interesting and exciting behind them. So there's my account of the Star of Bethlehem that I find most interesting and appealing. I hope that this has sparked your imagination for both scientific findings, especially those that can be more historical in character, as well as a careful reading of the biblical text, because it can be a lot of fun to bring the two together in responsible and careful kinds of ways. The day in which we celebrate the Three Kings is coming up soon, Three Kings Day, and I hope that this account helps ground your celebration of Three Kings, if you do that sort of thing, in a new way, in a deeper way, and that you're starting this new year off right. Thanks for joining me here. As always, like, subscribe, and send comments and suggestions for topics you'd like to hear me take up. But I'm Justin Barrett from Blueprint 1543. Happy New Year. Have a great 2024.